What happens when the most dangerous mob boss in New York tells a room full of killers that a boxing champion needs to stop breathing, and the one man who can prevent it has nothing left except a dime and a phone number? Before this story is over, you will hear 7 words. 7 words spoken once in a barber shop late at night that explain everything. Why Bumpy Johnson did what he did, why he did it exactly the way he did it, and why this story became the legend that the entire criminal underworld of New York City still whispers about to this day. Those 7 words are the most important part of everything you will hear today, but we will get to them at the very end, because to truly understand them, you need to walk the entire road first, from prison gates to a granite tombstone inside the bedroom of the most feared mafioso in America, Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, Pennsylvania. It was a Tuesday, the 11th of March, 1952, approximately 7:45 in the morning. When Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson stepped through the iron gates that clanged shut behind him with a sound he would hear in nightmares for the next 20 years, he was wearing the same dark gray wool suit they had taken him in 3 years and 8 months earlier, except now it hung loose on shoulders that had shed 23 pounds of muscle and replaced them with the kind of wiry thinness that comes from sleeping on concrete and eating food designed to keep a man alive, but never satisfied. His white shirt had yellowed at the collar. His shoes, once polished to mirrors, were scuffed beyond saving. In his left hand, he carried a paperback copy of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, published just 1 month earlier, mailed to him by an old friend who thought he might appreciate the irony. In his right hand, he held an envelope containing $32 in small bills and a one-way bus ticket to New York City. $32. The morning air smelled of wet earth, diesel fuel from a truck idling on the access road, and something else, something Bumpy had almost forgotten existed: freedom. It smelled like cut grass and cold wind, and absolutely nothing between him and the horizon. Nobody was waiting for him. No car, no driver, no entourage. The man whose name once silenced entire city blocks in Harlem stood alone on an empty road in rural Pennsylvania, squinting against a sun he had not seen, without bars across it since 1948, and waited for a Greyhound bus like a drifter with nowhere particular to go. The ride took 6 hours. Bumpy sat in the back row, next to a window smeared with fingerprints and rain residue, and read Ellison's novel cover to cover. The story of a black man rendered invisible by a society that refused to see him. Bumpy underlined 3 passages with a pencil stub. He would never tell anyone which 3. By the time the bus crossed the George Washington Bridge and the skyline of Manhattan materialized through the afternoon haze, Bumpy had finished the book, placed it carefully in his jacket pocket, and pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. Somewhere down there, beneath those towers and avenues, was Harlem, his Harlem. The kingdom he had built over 15 years, block by block, number by number, favor by favor, from a one-room apartment on 134th Street to a network that touched every gambling parlor, every after-hours club, every policy bank, and every soul who needed protection from the kind of men who preyed on black neighborhoods because they knew the police would never come. He arrived at the Port Authority bus terminal at 17 minutes past 6 in the evening, took the A train uptown, emerged at 145th Street, and walked south on Lenox Avenue. And with every block, every step, every storefront he passed, the truth hit him like a fist in the stomach. His headquarters on 141st Street, the building he had purchased in 38, the building from which he had run everything, now had a sign above the door in Italian. The name on it belonged to Fat Tony Salerno, a captain in the Genovese crime family, an Italian, in the heart of Black Harlem, sitting behind Bumpy's desk, in Bumpy's chair, counting Bumpy's money, the gambling spot on 138th, Italian, the bar on 136th, Italian, the laundry that used to wash his cash, Italian, the numbers operation on 143rd, Italian, 3 years and 8 months. That was all it had taken. They had come 6 weeks after his arrest, according to the whispers he caught from old faces who recognized him on the street and then looked away, not from fear of Bumpy, but from fear that the Italians would see them standing next to a dead man's ghost. They had come methodically, block by block, business by business. Anyone who resisted disappeared. Anyone who cooperated kept breathing but lost their dignity. And anyone who tried to organize resistance discovered that the Italians had made arrangements with the police, with the politicians, with the landlords, with every lever of power that could crush a black man in 1949 New York City. Bumpy walked into the only place that had not changed, Sammy's barber shop on Lenox Avenue, between 137th and 138th. The bell above the door jingled. Old Sammy, 71 years old, hands still steady enough to cut a straight line on a sleeping man, dropped his scissors when he saw the figure in the doorway. His mouth opened. No sound came out. Then he crossed the shop floor in 4 steps and embraced Bumpy so tightly that the younger man felt ribs he did not remember having. For the next 15 minutes, Sammy whispered, names, Bumpy's people, the ones who had vanished. Names. Willie the Count, gone, found floating in the Harlem River in 49. James Pee Wee Matthews, gone, last seen being pushed into a car on 8th Avenue. Roosevelt Jackson, gone. Herman Smalls, gone. Deacon Brown, alive but working for Salerno now, running numbers for pennies, too afraid to look anyone in the eye. The list went on. 17 names, 17 men who had been loyal, 17 men who were either no longer breathing or no longer standing upright. Bumpy sat in the barber chair nearest the window. The leather was cracked in the same places he remembered. The smell was the same. Bay rum, aftershave, hot metal from the clippers, the faint sweetness of pomade. Everything the same, everything different. Sammy, he said quietly, they think I am a ghost, that I came back and cannot do anything, that I am finished. Sammy said nothing. He picked up his broom and began sweeping hair from the floor, because that was what Sammy did when he did not know what to say. Bumpy looked out the window at Lenox Avenue, at the Italian faces behind the counters of establishments that used to belong to black men and women. You know what is more dangerous than a living enemy, Sammy? Sammy stopped sweeping. An enemy they buried alive, because he has nothing left to lose? Bumpy Johnson was a man who weighed every word like a jeweler weighs stones, by the carat. In his entire life, those who stood close to him could count on the fingers of one hand the moments when he said something that changed the expression on people's faces. One of those moments, in this very barber shop after everything was over, is still ahead. But Bumpy did not yet know the most important thing. In all of Harlem there remained one point of light, one business that refused to kneel, one name that people still spoke with pride instead of in whispers, and that name, in exactly 22 days, would become the reason Bumpy Johnson declared war on the most powerful crime family in New York City. A war he would win without firing a single bullet. The man's name was Sugar Ray Robinson, and what made him dangerous to the Italians was not his fists, it was his cash register. Saturday, the 29th of March, 1952, 2:30 in the afternoon. A pink Cadillac Eldorado turned the corner onto 134th Street, and the chrome grille caught the March sunlight with such ferocity that pedestrians on both sidewalks shielded their eyes for a moment, as if someone had aimed a spotlight at the block. Behind the wheel sat Walker Smith, Jr., whom every living human being on the planet knew as Sugar Ray Robinson. 128 victories in 137 professional fights, world middleweight champion. The Man Ring magazine had just named the greatest boxer pound for pound in the history of the sport. His hands, the same hands that had knocked Jake LaMotta through the ropes, that had put Kid Gavilan on the canvas, that had ended careers with a single left hook, rested lightly on the steering wheel as the car glided past the block everyone in New York called Sugar Ray's Boulevard. Next to him in the passenger seat, reading a creased page from The Invisible Man, sat Bumpy Johnson. Robinson had invited him to lunch, not out of charity, out of desperation. The empire of Sugar Ray Robinson on 7th Avenue was unlike anything Harlem had ever seen. The cafe, Sugar Ray's, on the corner, packed every day from opening to closing, famous for its fried chicken and peach cobbler. The dry cleaner across the street, a line out the door on Saturdays, a beauty parlor for women, a lingerie shop, a men's tailor, a real estate office, 6 businesses, all bearing Robinson's name on the awning, all managed by black employees, all turning a profit, and not one, not a single one, paying a cent of tribute to the Italian mob. Robinson's fame was his shield. He was too visible to touch openly. Newspaper reporters followed him. Photographers camped outside his cafe. Fans recognized him within seconds. The mob could not send soldiers to his door the way they sent them to a corner bar owner who had no one to call. But the shield was cracking. Over plates of collard greens and cornbread, in a corner booth of Sugar Ray's Cafe, where the air smelled of fried onions and fresh coffee and cinnamon from the sweet potato pie cooling in the kitchen, Robinson's smile vanished the moment he leaned across the table toward Bumpy. He spoke quietly so the waitresses would not hear. Every week, he said, every single week Genovese's people came with a partnership offer. The first time, polite, almost friendly, a business proposal. The second time, insistent, the smiles thinner. The third time, a warning. The fourth time, last week, someone slashed the tires on the pink Cadillac while it sat in front of the cafe and left a note under the windshield wiper. One word, think. And yesterday, Johnny Dio, a soldier in the Genovese family, walked into the cafe at lunch hour, sat at the counter, ordered a cup of coffee, and said to the waitress, loudly, so that every customer in the room could hear, "Tell your boss the coffee here is terrible." And pretty soon he will not have anyone left to pour it. Robinson's hands, those legendary hands that had put 128 men on their backs, were clenched into fists on his knees beneath the table. His jaw was tight. His eyes were wet, not from sadness, from fury caged behind the knowledge that fury was exactly what they wanted. "Bumpy," he said, "I am a boxer. Any man on this earth I will put down in a ring, but they do not step into rings. They shoot from behind. And I have a wife. I have a son. I do not know how many more times I can say no before they decide it is time to shut me up forever." Bumpy reached across the table and gripped Robinson's wrist. Hard. Bumpy reached like a man stopping another man from stepping off a ledge. "Ray, you will not say another word to them. Not yes, not no, not one word, because from now on the one talking to them will be me, and I will speak in the language they understand best." Robinson looked at him. The boxer's eyes met the gangster's eyes, and what passed between them in that second was not a business arrangement. It was an oath. Through the cafe window, across the street, a dark green Buick sat at the curb with its engine off. Behind the wheel, Johnny Dio, the same Johnny Dio who had insulted the waitress the day before, watched the pink Cadillac, watched the two men through the glass, and wrote something in a small leather notebook. Time of arrival, duration of meeting, names. Bumpy noticed the Buick. Robinson noticed the Buick. Neither mentioned it, but Bumpy memorized the license plate, the model of the notebook, and the finger Dio used to hold the page open. 4 days later, an envelope with no return address would be found tucked beneath the windshield wiper of the pink Cadillac. Inside, a single sentence, handwritten, and that sentence would change everything. The sentence was not long, 8 words, typed on a strip of paper torn from a larger sheet. Pay by the first, or Robinson stops breathing. No signature, no letterhead, no fingerprints, just 8 words, and the faint smell of cigar smoke embedded in the paper. Toscani Cigars, the brand favored by exactly one man in the Genovese organization. Bumpy held the strip of paper up to the streetlight on 7th Avenue and read it twice. Then folded it, placed it in his breast pocket next to the creased paperback of Invisible Man, and walked north on Lenox Avenue with the unhurried stride of a man who has already decided what he is going to do and is simply choosing the order of operations. Wednesday, the 2nd of April, 1952, 20 minutes past 9 in the evening. The 2nd of April, Rouse restaurant on 114th Street, East Harlem. 8 tables. The smell of garlic, slow-simmered tomato sauce, Toscani cigars, and expensive cologne. A single room, low ceiling, dim lighting from candles in red glass holders on each table, walls covered with autographed photographs of Frank Sinatra, Joe DiMaggio, and men whose photographs you would not find in any newspaper because newspapers did not print photographs of people who made other people disappear. Behind the long table at the back of the room sat Vito Genovese, returned from Italy 2 years prior, now methodically seizing power from the aging Frank Costello, positioning himself to become the boss of all bosses. His suit cost $800. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. Gold cufflinks caught the candlelight each time he gestured, which was often because Vito Genovese spoke with his hands the way conductors lead orchestras, every movement deliberate, every gesture carrying meaning. Around him sat 11 captains, 12 chairs at the table, 1 empty. The 12th was for Bumpy Johnson, the only black man in the room, brought here by an intermediary with the promise of a business discussion about the future of Harlem. Bumpy arrived at 9:20. Black English wool suit, white shirt, silver tie clip that reflected the candlelight like a small blade at his throat. He was escorted to the empty chair at the end of the table, the farthest point from Genovese, the seat designed to make a man feel like a petitioner rather than an equal. The old Italian waiter who served the table avoided Bumpy's eyes as he poured the wine. The waiter's hands trembled slightly. He knew something Bumpy did not, or perhaps he knew it, and Bumpy knew it too, and both men had simply agreed in silence that the next 40 minutes were a performance, and the script had already been written. The first 40 minutes were civil. Antipasto, prosciutto, mozzarella, roasted peppers glistening with olive oil, red wine, a Chianti from a vineyard that one of the captains owned through a front company in Tuscany. Talk of horse racing. The odds-on native dancer who was running at Jamaica Racetrack next week. Genovese even laughed at something Bumpy said, a comment about the quality of the wine compared to prison hooch. The captains chuckled politely. For 40 minutes the room pretended that this was a meeting between equals. Then the second course arrived. Veal Parmigiana, the sauce thick and fragrant, steam curling from the plates. Genovese raised his glass and proposed a toast. "To order in Harlem," he said. The captains raised their glasses. Bumpy raised his. They drank. And then Genovese set his glass down, and his eyes changed. The warmth drained from them like water from a cracked basin, and what remained was something flat, something appraising, something that looked at Bumpy Johnson the way a man looks at a column of numbers in a ledger, calculating profit and loss. He began to recite, slowly, with pleasure, every address that had once belonged to Bumpy's operation and now belonged to the Genovese family, every name of every former lieutenant who now worked for the Italians, every dollar figure of revenue that now flowed into Genovese's pockets. The gambling parlor on 138th, $62,000 a year. The numbers operation on 143rd, $115,000. The protection payments from Lenox Avenue businesses, $80,000. He knew every number. He recited them the way a conqueror reads the inventory of a captured city to the defeated king, sitting across the table forced to listen. The 11 captains smirked. One poured himself more wine. Another leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man watching a bullfight from the expensive seats. This was not a business meeting. This was an autopsy. A public dissection of a dead empire, performed in front of the man who had built it. And then Genovese said the name Sugar Ray Robinson, and the temperature in the room dropped by 10 degrees. Genovese set down his fork, dabbed his lips with a white linen napkin, looked not at Bumpy but through him, addressing his captains as though Bumpy were a piece of furniture. This boxer, this Robinson, he thinks his fame is a shield. He thinks cameras and newspapers will protect him. He turned to Bumpy, for the first time in the entire monologue, looking directly into his eyes. "Tell him this, Johnson. Every one of his businesses on 7th Avenue starts paying on the 1st, every single one, or Sugar Ray Robinson does not live to see his next fight. And this is not a threat. This is a schedule." Silence, then a slap. One of the captains brought his palm down on the table and howled with laughter. A second joined, a third, 11 men laughing, and the sound bouncing off the walls of the tiny restaurant, and the old waiter pressing himself flat against the kitchen door, and the candle flames flickering from the sheer volume of it. And then Genovese added, quietly, almost tenderly, the way a man whispers to a child he is about to strike, "And for you, Johnson, I have nothing to say at all, because you are nobody. You have nothing I could not take in a single night. You are sitting at this table only because I was curious to see what a man looks like when he has lost everything and has not realized it yet." Bumpy did not move, not a single muscle in his face, not a tremor in his hands, not a clenching of fists. He did what required more courage than drawing a weapon. He stood up, slowly, placed his napkin on the table, adjusted his cuffs, left, then right, and looked at Genovese. 5 seconds, in silence, and in those 5 seconds, Captain Tony Bender would later tell an associate over drinks, there was something in the black man's gaze that made you want to look away. There was something, not fear, not rage, something worse, a promise, the kind of promise that does not need words because it is written in a language older than speech. Bumpy walked to the door, opened it, stepped into the night. The door closed quietly behind him. Genovese raised his glass. "To order," he said. 11 captains clinked crystal. They did not know that they had just signed themselves into the most humiliating episode in the history of the 5 families. Remember the 7 words I mentioned at the beginning? It was exactly in this moment, as Bumpy walked down dark 114th Street with the face of a surgeon who has just made a diagnosis and knows precisely where to cut, while behind him 11 captains laughed at the man they had called nobody. That those words crystallized in his mind. He had not spoken them aloud. Not yet. But they already existed. And right now, a phone booth on the corner of 115th Street. Because before Bumpy could speak 7 words, he first needed to dial 7 digits. 10:08 p.m. 11 minutes after leaving the restaurant, the corner of 115th Street and Pleasant Avenue, East Harlem. A phone booth with a cracked glass panel and the smell of urine and rusted metal. Bumpy stood inside. The light from a street lamp fell through the crack in the glass, splitting his face into 2 halves, one in light, one in shadow. The street was empty. Somewhere from an open window above a bodega, a radio played Nat King Cole singing Unforgettable. The melody drifted down like smoke. Bumpy reached into his pocket and produced a single coin, a dime. He held it between his thumb and forefinger for a moment, feeling the weight of it, 2.27 grams, the portrait of Roosevelt on the obverse, the torch and olive branch on the reverse. Then he dropped it into the slot. It fell with a small, bright sound, the most consequential 10 cents in the history of organized crime in New York City. 10 cents. He dialed 7 digits, 4 rings, a click. The voice on the other end did not say hello, did not ask who was calling. This man had been waiting for this call, perhaps for years. He was not a mafioso. He was not a politician. He was something that existed in the space between those worlds. A man who, over 2 decades, had built a network of obligations and debts that penetrated the police department, City Hall, the docks, the labor unions, and, critically, the service industry. Plumbers, electricians, janitors, gardeners, laundry workers, cooks, delivery men. The invisible army of people who enter homes and offices every day because the owners themselves open the doors for them. People who are looked through, stepped around, treated as furniture, people who see everything and are seen by no one. The conversation lasted 31 seconds. Bumpy spoke 3 sentences, a tombstone, real, granite, with the full name of Vito Genovese and this Sunday's date. Deliver it to his bedroom. He needs to see it first thing when he opens his eyes. Silence on the line. 2 seconds. 3. When? Saturday night into Sunday. I have 4 days. Another second of silence. Then a short laugh. Not amused. Admiring. The sound a man makes when he sees something simultaneously insane and brilliant. Done. Click. Dial tone. Bumpy hung up the receiver, stepped out of the booth, and for the first time that evening allowed himself to smile. Not cruelly. Not triumphantly, with the expression of a man who has just pressed a button and knows that the mechanism now operates on its own, without his involvement, without the possibility of being stopped, without margin for error. Sugar Ray Robinson at that very minute sat in his living room on 134th Street, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling, replaying Bumpy's words from the cafe. I will speak in the language they understand best. He did not know that 47 blocks from his insomnia, Bumpy Johnson carried 7 words inside him like a grenade with the pin already pulled, waiting only for the moment when they could be spoken aloud, the moment when they would be not just words but a verdict. The mechanism, set in motion by a 10-cent coin, was already gathering speed. Within 6 hours, 5 people in 5 locations across New York City would begin to move. None of them would know each other's names. None would see the full picture. Each would know only his own fragment, like 5 fingers on a hand that was about to close into a fist. Thursday, the 3rd of April, 6 in the morning. Harlem woke as it always did. The clatter of milk bottles on stoops, the hiss of bus brakes on Lenox Avenue, the bell of the church on 135th Street marking the hour. But beneath the ordinary surface of an ordinary spring morning, an invisible machine was running. The first man, Walter King, age 58, stonemason, Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn. A veteran of the First World War who had carved more than 2,000 tombstones in 30 years and whose hands bore the calluses of a man who spoke to granite the way others spoke to people, with patience, precision, and respect. At 7:15 that morning, the owner of Unity Funeral Home in Harlem walked into King's workshop with a rush order, a tombstone, best quality granite, gray, polished to a mirror finish, name, Vito Genovese, date of birth, November 21st, 1897, date of departure, April 6th, 1952, this Sunday, 3 days from now. King looked at the order form, then at the client. The man is still alive? The client did not answer the question. He placed an envelope on the workbench. $500, 5 times the standard price. By Saturday evening. And Walter, you never received this order. King looked at the envelope, looked at the name on the form, picked up his chisel. The second man, Cecil Drake, plumber, licensed and bonded, employed by a maintenance company servicing private homes in the wealthy suburbs of Long Island. At 8:30 that morning, Drake received a work order for an emergency pipe inspection at 14 Middle Neck Road, Manhasset, Long Island, the country residence of Vito Genovese. Drake was not a criminal. He was a plumber who owed money to certain people, and those people had asked for a favor. Enter the house, check the pipes, and remember 3 things: the location of the master bedroom, the schedule of the security shift change, and whether the back door through the conservatory had a lock that could be opened with a flathead screwdriver. Drake arrived at 9. The guards let him in without a second glance. He wore a uniform, carried tools, had a legitimate work order from the servicing company. He checked every pipe in the house, spent 2 hours. The pipes were fine. The master bedroom was on the 2nd floor, 3rd door on the left. The security shift changed at 2 in the morning. A 15-minute window when one guard went inside and the replacement had not yet come out. The back door through the conservatory had a Yale lock, the kind that could be persuaded with a flathead screwdriver and 3 seconds of patience. Drake left the house, drove to a payphone, and reported his findings in 1 sentence. Pipes are fine. 3rd door on the left, 2 a.m. The voice on the other end said, "Understood. Forget this number." Drake hung up, drove home, never spoke of it again. The third man, a truck driver who knew only a pickup point and a delivery point. The 4th and 5th, 2 longshoremen, former dock workers from the Port of New York, broad-shouldered, silent, accustomed to carrying heavy loads in total darkness because they had spent years unloading contraband from ships after midnight. They knew how to move through the dark without sound. They knew how to lift 240 pounds without grunting. They knew how to follow instructions without asking questions. And right now, at this very second, as the stonemason in Brooklyn cut letters into granite and the plumber transmitted the layout of a bedroom, Bumpy Johnson's 7 words crossed from thought into decision, from philosophy into weapon. He had not spoken them aloud yet. That would happen in 12 days in Sammy's barber shop late at night. And when it happened, Sammy, a man who had known Bumpy for 30 years, who had cut his hair on his wedding day and on the day of his mother's funeral, who believed nothing on this earth could surprise him anymore, would lower his scissors and step back from the chair, not from fear, from understanding. What exactly did Bumpy say to him? Soon. But first, 240 pounds of granite needed to travel across 3 bridges and into the bedroom of a man surrounded by 4 armed guards. By Saturday evening, Bumpy had also sent a separate message, not to Genovese, to Frank Costello, the current official boss of the Genovese family, the man whom Vito was maneuvering to overthrow. The message was verbal, delivered by an intermediary who spoke at once and left. Mr. Johnson asks Mr. Costello to pay close attention to what happens to Mr. Genovese on Sunday morning, and to draw his own conclusions about a man who cannot guarantee the safety of his own bedroom. This was a chess move inside a chess move. Bumpy was not merely frightening Genovese, he was undermining Genovese's authority in front of his own boss, planting doubt in the mind of the one man whose opinion Genovese needed most. A dime for the phone call, a $500 tombstone, and a whispered sentence to the right ear. Total cost of the operation that would bring the most powerful crime family in New York to its knees, $500.10. By Saturday evening, Walter King had finished his work. 240 pounds of polished gray granite stood in his workshop, covered with burlap. The letters were perfect, deep, clean, precise. Vito Genovese. The dates, the small cross above the name that King added to every tombstone because his mother had taught him that every soul deserved at least that much, regardless of whose name was on the stone. He turned off the lamp, locked the door with 2 padlocks, and walked home without looking back. In 6 hours, a truck with no identifying marks would collect the stone. In 12 hours, the most powerful mafioso in New York would wake up and see his own tombstone at arm's length. And in that moment, he would understand what he had not understood at the table in Rouse, that Bumpy Johnson was not a ghost. Bumpy Johnson was a man who could walk through walls. Saturday night, the 5th of April, 1952, 1:45 in the morning. A truck with no license plates and no headlights rolled slowly off the paved road onto a dirt path 200 yards east of 14 Middle Neck Road, Manhasset, Long Island. The engine coughed once and died. Silence, complete, suffocating silence, the kind that exists only in wealthy suburbs at 2 in the morning, where the houses are set far apart and the lawns are so wide that a scream from one property would barely reach the next. Crickets, the distant hum of the Long Island Expressway, 3 miles south, and somewhere inside the house, behind walls of brick and plaster and money, Vito Genovese slept with the absolute confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. 4 men climbed out of the truck, 2 from the cab, 2 from the bed. None spoke. They had rehearsed this once, 3 hours earlier, in a garage in Queens, using chalk marks on the floor to represent the house layout: the conservatory door, the hallway, the staircase, the second-floor corridor, the third door on the left. Each man knew his role. The driver stayed with the truck, engine off, keys in the ignition, right foot hovering above the gas pedal. The other 3 gathered at the tailgate. The tombstone lay in the truck bed, wrapped in a dark wool blanket, secured with rope. 240 pounds of polished gray granite, 60 pounds per man if 3 carried it, 80 if one needed to scout ahead. They chose 3 carriers and 1 scout. The scout, the smallest of the 4, a former dock worker named Clarence, who could move through a pitch-black warehouse without disturbing a rat, went first. Black clothing, rubber-soled shoes, a flashlight wrapped in a red rag so the beam would be muted, barely visible, casting just enough crimson glow to illuminate 3 feet ahead, and nothing more. The thing that happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation, and to understand why, you need to know what Bumpy Johnson understood better than anyone in Harlem: that the people who clean your house, fix your pipes, and mow your lawn know your life better than your own family does. And they are invisible to you. That invisibility was about to become the most dangerous weapon in New York City. 2:04 in the morning. The security shift change, exactly on schedule, exactly as the plumber Cecil Drake had reported. One guard walked inside through the front door. The replacement had not yet emerged. A 15-minute window. Clarence crossed the lawn in a crouch, moving on the grass to avoid the gravel path that circled the fountain. The fountain, stone, 3 tiers, water trickling quietly in the dark, the sound masking his footsteps so perfectly that he later said the fountain was doing half the work. He reached the conservatory door, knelt, produced a flathead screwdriver from his pocket. 3 seconds. The Yale lock clicked open with a sound no louder than a knuckle cracking. He pushed the door inward. No alarm, no chain, no deadbolt. Genovese, who spent thousands on armed guards, had never bothered to secure the back door of his own home because the back door was used only by the gardener and the cleaning woman, invisible people who came and went through invisible entrances. Clarence slipped inside. The smell of the house hit him first. Lemon furniture polish, expensive tobacco, Toscani cigars, the same brand whose scent clung to the threatening note left on Robinson's windshield. The remnants of dinner, garlic, rosemary, roasted meat. A rich man's house, a powerful man's house, a house that had never, in its entire existence, been entered without permission. Clarence moved through the conservatory into the hallway, checked the staircase, 14 steps. He tested the first with the ball of his foot, shifting weight gradually. Silence. Second step. Silence. He climbed 7 steps and paused at the 7th. The plumber's report had not mentioned a problem here, but Clarence felt the wood give slightly under his weight, felt the faintest beginning of a creak. He shifted his foot to the far right edge of the step, where the wood met the wall, where the support was strongest. Silence. He continued. At the top of the staircase, he turned left, into a corridor lit only by a thin strip of moonlight coming through a window at the far end. 3 doors. The first, closed. The second, closed. The third, open, roughly the width of a hand. And from beyond that gap, the sound of breathing. Deep, steady, rhythmic breathing. The breathing of a man in dreamless sleep. The breathing of Vito Genovese. Clarence returned to the conservatory door and signaled. 3 low clicks of his tongue against his teeth. A dock worker's signal used on the waterfront for decades. The 3 remaining men moved. Across the lawn, through the garden, past the fountain, water still trickling, still covering sound, through the conservatory door, into the hallway, still covering sound. The Tombstone, still wrapped in the blanket, carried between them like a stretcher. 2 men on the sides, 1 at the rear, steadying. 60 pounds per carrier, but at this angle, on a staircase, with the need for absolute silence, it felt like 600. The staircase, first step, silence, second, silence, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 7th, the scout whispered, barely audible, edge right. They shifted. The wood groaned for a fraction of a second, so faintly that a man sleeping 20 feet away could not possibly have heard it. But all 4 froze. 3 seconds. 5. 7. From behind the third door, nothing. The breathing continued. They continued. 2nd floor. Corridor. The moonlight through the far window cast long, pale rectangles on the hardwood floor. The third door, open a hand's width. They pushed it gently. It swung inward without sound. The hinges had been oiled recently by someone, perhaps the same invisible person who polished the furniture and cleaned the windows and knew every door in this house better than the man who owned it. The bedroom, large, a king-size bed against the far wall, heavy curtains mostly drawn, a sliver of moonlight cutting across the bedspread, and in the bed, Vito Genovese, on his back, mouth slightly open, one arm hanging over the edge of the mattress, his fingers, the same fingers that 4 days ago had dabbed a white napkin against his lips while pronouncing a death sentence on Sugar Ray Robinson, dangled 12 inches above the floor, 12 inches from the spot where 240 pounds of polished granite were about to be placed. They lowered the tombstone. Slowly. The blanket absorbed the impact as the base touched the hardwood floor. A dull, almost inaudible thud, like a heartbeat. One of the carriers peeled the blanket away, revealing the polished surface. The red-filtered flashlight swept across the letters. VITOGENOVESE. Date of birth. Date of departure. Today.
April 6th, 1952. The snoring did not stop. Genovese lay there, oblivious, his dangling fingers close enough to the granite to touch it if his arm swung in his sleep. The most feared mob boss in New York City, sleeping beside his own grave marker, breathing peacefully while 4 strangers stood in his bedroom and watched. The leader of the group reached into his jacket and produced an envelope, white, unsealed. He placed it on top of the tombstone, centering it precisely. Inside the envelope, a strip of paper, 6 words in handwriting that Genovese would not recognize because the person who wrote them was no one, a ghost, an invisible man. Today, the stone. Tomorrow, not the stone. And the leader, placing that envelope on the polished granite, did not know, and would never know, that this stone was merely the illustration for 7 words that Bumpy would speak to Sammy in 8 days, in that quiet voice that would make the old barber forget to breathe. 4 men exited the way they entered. Conservatory, garden, lawn, dirt path, truck. The engine caught on the 3rd try. The driver's hands were shaking, the only moment during the entire operation when nerves betrayed themselves. By 2:31, they were a mile from the house. By 3, they were on the expressway. By dawn, they were in Brooklyn. The truck would be repainted by noon, the plates replaced, the blanket burned in a trash barrel behind a warehouse in Red Hook. The operation had taken 22 minutes from door to door. No alarm triggered, no guard alerted, no sound louder than the creak of the 7th step on the staircase. 240 pounds of granite, carried through a dark garden, up 14 stairs, and into the bedroom of the most protected man in the New York underworld, as if it had materialized from thin air. Sunday, the 6th of April, 1952, 6:11 in the morning. Sunlight crept through the curtains of the master bedroom at 14 Middle Neck Road. Vito Genovese woke the way he always did, not from an alarm, but from habit. Decades of early mornings, of being the first to rise, of starting the day before anyone else could gain an advantage. The first thing he did every morning was reach for the glass of water on the nightstand with his right hand. His fingers found the glass. He raised it to his lips, drank, set it back. Then he swung his legs over the side of the bed to stand. His right foot did not touch the hardwood floor. It touched something cold, something smooth, something that should not have been there. He looked down. For 2 seconds, perhaps 3, his brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. A gray rectangle, stone, letters. He leaned forward, squinting in the early light, and read the inscription. His name, his full name, carved in granite. His date of birth, correct to the day, and a date of departure, today. April 6th, 1952. Have you ever felt the ground disappear beneath your feet? Not physically, but in your mind.
The moment when everything you believe to be solid turns out to be smoke. Vito Genovese experienced this at 6:11 on a Sunday morning, barefoot, in his own bedroom, staring at his own tombstone. Later, one of the guards would tell another, whispering, looking over his shoulder, that he had never heard a scream like it. Not a scream of pain, not a scream of rage, the scream of a man who has woken up inside his own coffin and discovered that someone sealed the lid while he slept. Genovese leaped out of bed, knocked the water glass off the nightstand. It shattered against the tombstone, water streaming across the letters of his name, pooling in the carved grooves of the G, trickling down the polished face of the stone like tears on a granite cheek. He grabbed the pistol from the nightstand drawer, a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson, loaded, always loaded, and ran into the corridor screaming for his guards. 2 men rushed upstairs with weapons drawn. They searched the house, every room, every closet, the attic, the basement, the conservatory. The door was closed, locked from inside, no visible signs of forced entry. The garden, the garage, the perimeter, nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, no scratches on any lock. As if 240 pounds of polished granite had materialized from the air itself and placed itself beside the bed of a sleeping man. Genovese returned to the bedroom, stood over the tombstone. His bare feet were wet from the spilled water. His hands, the hands of a man who had coolly ordered the elimination of rivals, who had strangled a man with his bare fingers in 1934, who had never shown weakness in front of anyone, were shaking, visibly, violently. He picked up the envelope, opened it, read the 6 words. Today, the stone. Tomorrow, not the stone. He read them again, and again, and again. Each reading drove the same thought deeper into his brain like a nail into wood. Someone stood here, over me, while I slept. Someone could have done anything, and they chose to leave a message. He summoned the head of his security detail. The man entered the bedroom, saw the tombstone, and went pale. Genovese grabbed him by the lapels, his fingers white, his knuckles rigid, his breath coming in short gasps that fogged the air between their faces. How? How did they get in? 4 men on security, a fence, an alarm system. How? The guard had no answer, because the answer did not exist, not in the world that Genovese understood. The people who had done this had not broken in. They had walked in through a door opened by a man in a uniform carrying tools, a man with a work order, a man Genovese's own guards had waved through without a second glance, a plumber, invisible, and the information that plumber gathered had been passed to men who moved through darkness the way fish move through water, silently, effortlessly, leaving no trace. Find out who did this. I do not care what it costs. Find out. The guard nodded. He already knew he would find nothing, but he nodded. 6:11 in the morning. Genovese stood over his own tombstone with shaking hands. And at that exact moment, at that very moment, Bumpy Johnson sat in Sammy's barber shop on Lenox Avenue, the paperback of Invisible Man open on his knee, drinking coffee that Sammy had brewed at 5:30 because he could not sleep either. On Bumpy's face, the calm of a man watching the first domino fall and knowing exactly how many will follow. He knew what was happening on Long Island. He had known since the coin dropped into the telephone slot. The 7 words you will hear in just a few minutes, because we are almost there, explain that calm better than any description I could offer. But first, the panic. First, what the tombstone did to the mind of Vito Genovese and to the foundation of his power. By noon on Sunday, Genovese made 5 phone calls to his closest captains. His voice on the telephone was a voice his men had never heard before, Not anger, not command. Fear. Raw, vibrating, animal fear. The sound of a man who has just discovered that his fortress is made of glass. Two of the captains, upon hearing about the Tombstone, went silent for several seconds. One, Tony Bender, the same Tony Bender who had watched Bumpy's gaze in Rouse restaurant and felt the urge to look away, said quietly, "Vito, it is Johnson, the black man from the restaurant. It is him." And Genovese understood. The man he had called nobody. The man without an army, without territory, without money. The man with a 10-cent coin and one phone call. By Monday morning, the news had spread to 20 people in Genovese's inner circle. By Wednesday, it had reached every captain in every one of the 5 families, and every single one of them asked the same question that Genovese himself could not stop asking. If Bumpy Johnson can get into the bedroom of a mob boss and leave a tombstone, what can he do to you? Monday, the 7th of April, 10 in the morning. Genovese's headquarters on Thompson Street, Greenwich Village. He sat behind his desk, and for the first time in 20 years, no one in the room saw what had always made him a boss, that absolute certainty of his own invulnerability. Instead, they saw red eyes. 2 nights without sleep. He could not close his eyes. Every time he tried, he saw the granite letters, emergency meeting, 5 captains. Genovese demanded retaliation. Find Johnson. Eliminate him. Today. But the captains exchanged glances, and Tony Bender, carefully weighing every syllable, said the thing no one else dared to speak. "Vito, wait. Think. This man walked into your house past 4 guards without leaving a trace. He knows the layout. He knows the shift schedule. He knows which lock is on the back door. If we touch him, and he has obviously prepared for that possibility, what happens? Who else works for him? Your cook? Your driver? The man who cleans your pool?" Genovese opened his mouth and closed it, because Bender was right. Bumpy had not merely frightened him, Bumpy had poisoned his world. Now every maintenance worker, every plumber, every electrician, every delivery man was a potential enemy. Every open door was a potential entrance for the next delivery, and the next delivery might not be a stone. That same day, Genovese fired all household staff, changed the guards, changed the locks, changed his travel routes, moved out of the Long Island house into an apartment in Manhattan. But the paranoia did not release its grip, because if Bumpy's invisible army had penetrated one home, what stopped them from penetrating another? What happens when a man begins to see enemies in every shadow, not because the enemies are real, but because he can no longer tell the difference? 80% of Genovese's power had always rested on one thing, the belief that he was untouchable. The Tombstone shattered that belief, and once belief shatters, it does not heal. The word spread through channels that had nothing to do with Bumpy. It spread because fear is its own messenger. A captain in the Lucchese family, not a subordinate of Genovese, but a rival, learned of the Tombstone on Wednesday and said to his consigliere over lunch, "So Vito cannot protect his own bedroom, and this man wants to chair the commission. This man, whom some black fellow from Harlem sent running from his own house?" Interesting. The word interesting, spoken with a smirk, with narrowed eyes, with calculation, cost Genovese more than any bullet. Frank Costello, the sitting boss of the Genovese family, the man Vito was plotting to overthrow, received Bumpy's message, the one sent Saturday night through an intermediary. Pay attention to what happens to Mr. Genovese on Sunday morning. Draw your own conclusions about a man who cannot guarantee the safety of his own bedroom. Costello smiled, for the first time in months, because the man sharpening a knife for his chair had just been publicly destroyed, not by a gun, by a stone. And through all of this, Bumpy made no public statement. No boasts, no threats. He sat in Sammy's barber shop and read Invisible Man, and said nothing, and that silence was more terrifying than any declaration of war, because the man who is silent after striking is preparing to strike again. And Genovese did not know, could not know, whether the next strike was coming, when, in what form, and that unknowing corroded him from the inside like acid on metal. And that unknowing, by the end of the week, 3 of Genovese's captains, the ones responsible for operations in Harlem, requested a meeting and asked a single question. Is Harlem worth going to war with a man who can walk through walls? Sammy, sweeping the barbershop floor on the evening the message arrived that Genovese wanted to meet, noticed the way Bumpy smiled, and remembered that night 4 days earlier and the 7 words, and for the first time truly understood what Bumpy had meant. Every word, literally every single one. On Friday, the 11th of April, exactly 9 days after the dinner at Rouse, Bumpy Johnson received a message through an intermediary. Vito Genovese wanted to meet, not at a restaurant, not on his territory, on neutral ground. And, for the first time in living memory, he was asking, not ordering. The man who 9 days ago had called Bumpy nobody was now requesting that nobody grant him an audience. The hunter had become prey, and Bumpy, sitting in Sammy's barber shop with the open book on his knees, allowed himself a smile. The second time in 9 days, the same smile. Saturday, the 12th of April, 1952, 8 in the evening. Neutral territory. The back room of Palermo's Italian restaurant on Mulberry Street, Little Italy. The location had been chosen by the intermediary, an old Sicilian respected by both sides. Genovese arrived first. 2 bodyguards who remained outside the door. He sat at the table, ordered water, not wine. He needed clarity. He waited 7 minutes, each minute stretched like an hour. He drummed his fingers on the table, stopped, realized he was showing nervousness, put his hands beneath the table. The door opened. Bumpy entered, alone. No bodyguards, no weapons, at least none visible. Black English wool suit, white shirt, silver tie clip, the same one he had worn at Rouse 10 days earlier. He sat across from Genovese, did not greet him, did not extend his hand, simply sat and looked, and waited. The silence lasted 23 seconds. 23 seconds in which the most powerful mafioso in New York could not make himself speak first. Genovese began. He tried to project strength, habit, instinct. Johnson, what you did is a declaration of war. You understand that? Bumpy said nothing. Genovese continued, I have 500 men. You have no one. I could erase you in a single night. Bumpy was silent for 5 more seconds. Then he leaned forward, slowly, like a man who has all the time in the world. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet, so quiet that Genovese had to lean forward to hear, closing the distance between them until their faces were barely 2 feet apart. Vito, you have 500 soldiers. That is true. But I am not a soldier. I am an invisible man. My people are the ones who open your doors, the ones who cook your food, the ones who wash your laundry, the ones who fix your pipes. You cannot fight invisible men because you cannot live without them. You could eliminate me tomorrow. But the day after you would wake up and wonder, is the plumber who came to fix the faucet here to fix the faucet, or is he here for me? And you would think that thought every morning, every single morning, for the rest of your life. Silence. Genovese did not move. His face was a mask of controlled fury. But beneath the table his right leg trembled in a fine, rapid vibration, a detail Bumpy noticed and filed away. Now to business, Bumpy said, leaning back in his chair. Sugar Ray Robinson. No one from your organization goes near him again, does not call him, does not look in his direction. His businesses on 7th Avenue pay nothing. Not now, not ever. That is the first condition. Second, the gambling operations on Lenox Avenue from 135th to 145th, mine, were mine, will be mine again by the end of the month. Third, black businesses in Harlem, restaurants, barbershops, stores, no longer pay your people for protection. Harlem protects Harlem. Genovese clenched his jaw. You understand what you are asking? This is millions. Bumpy tilted his head slightly. I am not asking. I did not ask you to put the tombstone beside your bed. I put it there. Just as I am not asking you to return Harlem, I am taking it. And you are deciding only one thing, whether you want to wake up every morning staring at a stone with your own name on it, or whether you want to sleep in peace. Genovese was silent a long time. Then, in a voice where every word cost him a piece of his pride, like paying a debt in flesh, Robinson will not be touched. The Lenox operations we will discuss. The rest. Bumpy raised one hand, palm forward, and Genovese, a man who had never allowed anyone except the head of the commission to interrupt him, stopped speaking. We will not discuss. You will return, all three, or the next stone will not be beside the bed. It will be above it. Pause. 3 seconds. 5, 7. Genovese nodded. Once, briefly, like a man swallowing broken glass. Bumpy stood, adjusted his cuffs, left, then right. The same gesture he had made walking out of Rouse. But now that gesture meant something different. Not retreat, completion. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he paused and turned. Vito, one last thing. When you get home tonight, check the nightstand beside your bed. Something there for you. Genovese drove home, to his new apartment, in Manhattan, the apartment he had moved into after the tombstone. New locks, new guards, new address that only 4 people knew. He entered the bedroom. On the nightstand, placed precisely in the center, sat a single dime. Everything he had done, new apartment, new locks, new guards, meant nothing. They had gotten in again and left 10 cents, the cost of one phone call, the phone call that had dismantled his world. That night, Vito Genovese slept with the lights on for the first time in his life. A dime on the nightstand, a tombstone by the bed, 6 words on a note, Sugar Ray untouched, Harlem returning, all of it, the result of one phone call, one plan, one man, and Bumpy Johnson standing in Sammy's barbershop late on the night of April 12th, hours after Genovese nodded like a man choking on glass, finally spoke aloud what he had carried inside since the night of the dinner at Rouse. Sammy was closing. Bumpy sat in the chair by the window. The Ellison paperback lay open on his knee. And Bumpy said 7 words. Quietly. Sammy would never tell Robinson, would never tell his wife, would never tell his grandchildren. He would speak them aloud only once more, 16 years later in this same barbershop. And right now, I will tell you, because you have walked the entire road, because you heard Genovese call Bumpy a nobody, and you watched that nobody walk into the bedroom of a god, and you felt the hands of a man trembling beside his own grave, because you have earned the right to know the truth. By the end of April, every condition had been met. Sugar Ray Robinson never received another offer, not one. The gambling operations on Lenox Avenue returned to Bumpy's control. Black businesses in Harlem stopped paying Italian tribute. The pink Cadillac rolled up and down 7th Avenue without a dark green Buick trailing behind it. Boys played stickball on 134th Street. Old women sat on stoops without looking over their shoulders. Harlem breathed, and the story of the tombstone was already living its own life. Every retelling added a detail. In one version, the tombstone weighed 500 pounds. In another, Bumpy had personally stood over Genovese's bed holding a knife. In a third, the note contained 20 words instead of 6. The details changed. The essence never did. A man with nothing defeated a man with everything. An invisible man defeated a man who believed himself a god. 10 cents defeated a $1 million empire. The consequences for Genovese extended far beyond Harlem. His authority within the commission was undermined. Frank Costello used the Tombstone story as ammunition at every meeting. A man who cannot protect his own bedroom wants to lead the commission. The captains of the other families, Lucchese, Profaci, Bonanno, retold the story with smirks. Genovese felt the ground shifting beneath him. Every time he entered a room, he sensed that someone had stopped talking a moment before. Every time an unfamiliar worker appeared in his home, an electrician, a cleaner, a courier, his hand moved involuntarily toward his weapon. He began changing apartments every 2 or 3 weeks, then every week. He stopped eating food prepared by strangers. He stopped trusting men he had trusted for 20 years. The paranoia that a single tombstone had ignited devoured him from the inside more slowly than a bullet, but more certainly. The man who had wanted to rule New York could no longer drink a glass of water in his own kitchen without wondering who had touched it. This was the cost of underestimating a man who had nothing left to lose. This was the price of calling someone nobody in a room full of laughing captains. And the ripples did not stop at the borders of the criminal world. They reached into something larger, something that would reshape an entire city. The methods Bumpy pioneered in April of '52, the use of invisible people, psychological warfare instead of physical violence, the undermining of authority from within the enemy's own organization, simultaneous pressure on multiple fronts, would be studied and replicated, not by criminals, by the civil rights movement, because Bumpy had proved a principle that Martin Luther King Jr. would articulate in different words a decade later, that nonviolent resistance destroys more thoroughly than any weapon. Bumpy did not fire a single shot, did not spill a single drop of blood. He used fear, not fear of pain, fear of the unseen, and that fear proved stronger than 500 armed soldiers. 1968, autumn. Sammy's barber shop on Lenox Avenue. 3 months after Bumpy Johnson had departed this world, at a table in Wells Restaurant on 7th Avenue, the same 7th Avenue he had saved from the Italian mob 16 years earlier. At his funeral, more than 1,000 people had come. Politicians, musicians, boxers, street vendors, barbers, housewives, children who knew him only as Mr. Johnson, the man who always gave a quarter for ice cream. Sugar Ray Robinson had stood in the front row, tears on his face. Sammy, 73 years old now, hands still steady, still cutting hair as straight as he had 40 years ago, sat in his own barber chair after closing. Across from him, a young reporter from the Amsterdam News, 26, notebook, pencil, eager eyes, writing an obituary, not an ordinary obituary, a full-page feature on a man whom some called the King of Harlem and others called a criminal. The reporter asked directly, "Mr. Sammy, everyone talks about the tombstone, about Genovese, about the phone call, but nobody can explain. Why that way? Why not a bullet? Why not a bomb? Why not poison? Why a stone?" Sammy was quiet. He reached into a drawer and produced a bottle of bourbon, the bottle Bumpy had left here 20 years ago, a bottle no one had touched since. He poured 2 glasses, took a sip. The bourbon was smooth. It had aged well in that drawer in the dark, waiting. "I will tell you one thing. One time, and you will never print this in your newspaper." The reporter set down his pencil, nodded. When Bumpy came back from that meeting on Mulberry Street, the negotiation after Genovese gave in, he came here. It was late. I was closing up. He sat in this chair. Sammy pointed at the chair by the window. The same chair where Bumpy had sat on his first day back from prison. The same cracked leather. The same view of Lenox Avenue. Put the book on his lap. That book, The Invisible Man, and said nothing for about 5 minutes. I was sweeping. Did not bother him. Then he said, "Sammy, sit down." Sammy set his glass on the counter. I sat, and he told me everything, about the phone call, about the stonemason, about the plumber, about the longshoreman, about the dime on the nightstand, every detail. I listened and could not breathe. When he finished, I asked, "Bumpy, why the stone? You could have sent a bullet, could have sent a bomb, could have sent anything. Why a tombstone?" Sammy fell silent, looked through the window at Lenox Avenue, where 20 years earlier the pink Cadillac used to glide past, and Bumpy would watch it from this very chair. He looked at me. With that look I had seen maybe 5 times in 30 years. Not angry, not triumphant, calm, like a man who had found the answer to a question he had been searching for his entire life. And he said 7 words. The reporter did not breathe. 7 words that I remember every day, every single day. That explain everything. Not just the tombstone, not just Genovese, but everything Bumpy Johnson ever did. His whole life, every decision, every step. Pause. Sammy finished his bourbon. He said, "An invisible man is stronger than any man with a gun." Silence in the barber shop. The street lamp outside the window flickered. Somewhere up the block a saxophone played, a slow, mournful phrase that curled through the night air like smoke from a cigarette nobody was smoking. "You see, kid, a bullet is visible. A bomb is visible. Those are things they understand, things they are prepared for, things they know how to defend against. But a stone in the bedroom, that is invisible. That is proof that you can be anywhere at any time, and no one will see you, that you are not an enemy they can hide from. You are air, you are shadow. You are the plumber who fixes the pipes, and the gardener who trims the lawn, and the courier who delivers packages. You are all the people they do not notice, the people they treat as furniture, and that is their downfall, because you cannot fight invisible men. You cannot shoot a shadow. You cannot arrest the air." Sammy set the empty glass on the table. Bumpy did not just frighten Genovese. He showed him and everyone else that real power does not belong to the man who pulls the trigger. It belongs to the man no one sees. And Genovese understood, for the first time in his life. And it broke him. Not the fear of the stone, the fear of what you cannot see. The reporter sat motionless. His notebook was closed. His pencil lay on the table. He would not write a single word of this, not because he had promised, but because he understood that some things cannot be printed. They can only be passed along, mouth to mouth, in a barber shop, after closing, under the flickering light of a street lamp. And so, across decades, those 7 words have reached you. An invisible man is stronger than any man with a gun. Bumpy Johnson proved it with 1 phone call, 1 dime, 1 stone carried through a dark garden at 3 a.m. He never fired a shot, never spilled a drop of blood. He used what he had always had and what Genovese never possessed. The people no one notices, the invisible ones, the ones who open doors and fix pipes and take out trash and mow lawns. An army you cannot see because it is everywhere. Vito Genovese ceased to exist in a federal prison cell in 1969, betrayed by his own men, the same men whose respect he had lost after the Tombstone. They say that until his final day he checked every corner of his cell before lying down, every evening, every single evening, searching for a stone that was not there. But the absence of the stone was worse than its presence, because absence meant it could appear at any time. The anticipation of the blow is always worse than the blow itself. And Genovese lived inside that anticipation for 11 years, from the morning of April 6, 1952, until the morning he stopped breathing in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary on Valentine's Day, 1969. They found a photograph in his cell, a photograph of the house on Middle Neck Road, the house with the conservatory door, with the 14 steps, with the third door on the left, the house he had fled and never returned to. He had kept that photograph for 17 years, not out of nostalgia but out of something darker, the way a man who nearly drowned keeps a picture of the ocean, not to remember the beauty, to remember the terror. Sugar Ray Robinson lived to 78. His businesses on 7th Avenue operated for another 15 years after that spring. The cafe served its last plate of fried chicken and peach cobbler in 1967, not because of the mob, but because the neighborhood was changing, because Harlem was changing, because America was changing in ways that neither Bumpy nor Robinson nor Genovese could have predicted. But for those 15 years, from 1952 to 1967, not a single member of any Italian crime family crossed the threshold of any business bearing the name Sugar Ray Robinson. Not once, not ever. The pink Cadillac cruised 7th Avenue in peace. Robinson gave autographs on the sidewalk without looking over his shoulder. His son grew up without knowing that his father had once been a target. Robinson never told him, and Bumpy never told him, and the only people who knew were the people who had been in that room at Rouse on the night of April 2nd, and those people had learned in the most visceral way possible the cost of threatening a man under Bumpy Johnson's protection. The ripple effect extended beyond 7th Avenue, beyond Harlem, beyond New York, and beyond. In 1953, a group of black business owners in Philadelphia used Bumpy's playbook, not the Tombstone, but the strategy of economic pressure applied through invisible networks, to force a compromise with an Irish syndicate that had been extracting protection payments from black neighborhoods in North Philadelphia. In 1955, a coalition of black longshoremen in Baltimore, inspired by stories of what Bumpy had done with dock workers in New York, organized a work slowdown that forced the integration of hiring practices at 3 waterfront warehouses. In 1957, a young minister in Montgomery, Alabama, who had heard the Tombstone story from a friend of a man who had been in Sammy's barbershop, incorporated the concept of invisible power, the power of people who are overlooked, underestimated, treated as furniture, into a sermon about the dignity of sanitation workers and domestic servants. The minister's name does not need to be spoken. You already know it. Bumpy Johnson did not invent nonviolent resistance. He did not invent economic warfare. He did not invent the strategy of making yourself invisible to your enemies. But he demonstrated, in one operation, over 4 days, with a budget of $500.10, that a man who has been declared nobody can bring a king to his knees without drawing blood. And that demonstration echoed. It echoed in the sit-ins, in the boycotts, in the marches, in every moment when a person who had been told, "You are nobody," looked at the person who said it and replied, not with fists, not with weapons, but with the quiet, devastating patience of someone who knows that the invisible man is always in the room, always watching, always capable of placing a stone beside your bed while you sleep. Bumpy Johnson was buried on a Thursday, July 11th, 1968. The funeral procession moved down 7th Avenue, Sugar Ray's Boulevard, and for 6 blocks, every business closed its doors. not because anyone ordered them to, because they wanted to. The florist on 136th put a sign in the window, "Closed for the King." The shoeshine man on 138th folded his chair and stood on the curb with his hat over his heart. Robinson drove the pink Cadillac, now 12 years old, the chrome dulled, the paint faded from cotton candy to something closer to the color of a sunset, at the front of the procession, moving so slowly that pedestrians walked alongside, touching the fender as if the car itself were a relic. At the cemetery, Robinson spoke. His voice broke twice. He said that Bumpy Johnson had saved his life, his business, and his dignity, and that the world would never know the full story because Bumpy had made him promise never to tell it. He kept that promise until his own passing in 1989. The full story, the phone call, the stonemason, the plumber, the longshoreman, the dime on the nightstand, he took with him. But Sammy told the reporter. And the reporter, who never printed a word, told his daughter. And the daughter told her son. And the son told a friend. And the friend told another friend. And so the story survived. Not in newspapers, not in history books, not in court transcripts, but in the place where the most important stories always survive. In barber shops, on stoops, over bourbon after midnight, in the quiet spaces between the things people say out loud. And at the center of every telling, no matter how many times the weight of the tombstone grew heavier, no matter how many words were added to the note, no matter how many guards were stationed at the door, at the center sat 7 words, spoken once, in a barber shop, late at night, by a man who had been called nobody and proved that nobody could walk through walls. An invisible man is stronger than any man with a gun. In Sammy's barber shop on Lenox Avenue, closed now, the chair reupholstered, the window replaced, the street outside unrecognizable to anyone who walked it in 1952, the corner where Bumpy's chair once stood is just a corner. No plaque, no photograph, no memorial. The book, the Ellison paperback, The Invisible Man, disintegrated years ago, its pages yellowed, its spine cracked, its underlined passages lost to time and humidity and the particular cruelty that the world inflicts on objects that were never meant to be preserved because no one understood their importance until they were gone. But if you go to a certain barber shop on Lenox Avenue, not Sammy's has been gone for decades, but another one 3 doors down, run by a man named Gerald, who inherited his chair and his clientele and his stories from a man who inherited them from a man who inherited them from Sammy. And if you sit in the chair nearest the window, and if you wait until the shop is empty and Gerald is sweeping the floor the way Sammy used to sweep it, and if you ask him about Bumpy Johnson and the tombstone, Gerald will stop sweeping. He will lean the broom against the wall. He will pull open a drawer beneath the counter, the same drawer where Sammy kept the bourbon, and he will take out a small object and place it on the counter in front of you. A dime, tarnished, worn, the portrait of Roosevelt barely visible, the torch and olive branch on the reverse smoothed almost to nothing by decades of fingers holding it, turning it, feeling its weight. Gerald will not say where the dime came from. He will not confirm that it is the same dime. He will not tell you anything at all, because Gerald, like Sammy before him, understands that the power of the story lives in the spaces between what is said and what is left unsaid. He will simply place the dime on the counter and smile, and you will understand. Because 10 cents, the weight of a coin, the cost of a call, the price of a connection between one invisible man and another, changed the history of Harlem, humbled the most powerful crime family in America, saved the life of the greatest boxer who ever lived, and proved once and for all that the people you do not see are the people you should fear the most. Bumpy Johnson knew this, and now you know it too. And somewhere, in a barber shop on a stoop, over bourbon after midnight, someone is telling this story right now. The details are shifting. The tombstone is getting heavier, the note is getting longer, the number of guards is growing, but the 7 words at the center remain unchanged, because truth does not need embellishment. It only needs a voice. An invisible man is stronger than any man with a gun. 7 words, 1 dime, 1 phone call, 1 night, and a man who was called nobody made a king check the corners of his room for the rest of his life.